This is Transparency, a podcast by Gender Dysphoria Alliance, hosted by Aaron Kimberly and Aaron Terrell. Each week we'll be joined by people who have personal or professional experience with gender dysphoria and physical transition. We'll also discuss how our trans experiences relate to the concept of gender identity. Join us for a compassionate yet heterodox approach to the question of trans.
Daniel is a 20-year-old trans man who transitioned at 16 and has been very happily living stealth ever since. He doesn't understand or believe in being trans without gender dysphoria and is very concerned by the increasingly prevalent narrative that such a thing is even possible. He's worried about the future and how this strong push for trans rights may cause backlash, which may turn back the clock on trans healthcare, LGBT rights, and the stereotypes about trans people in the general population. Because of this, he's stepping out of his no politics lifestyle to become involved for the sake of his future and reputation. And here's our conversation with Daniel. Welcome back to Transparency, everyone. We've got Daniel here with us, and my co-host, as ever, Aaron Terrell. Daniel, welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
So you had reached out to us, I think it was must have been roughly about a month ago that you had emailed us and had expressed that, you haven't really been into the activism. You transitioned a number of years ago. I think you said you're living stealth and you were just kind of trying to live your life, but you've become concerned about what some of the trans activists have been doing and concerned about what that will mean for all of us moving forward. But before we get to that and sort of your reasons for reaching out to us and wanting to speak publicly, I'd love to just hear a bit of your story and what gender dysphoria was like for you growing up.
For sure. So it's kind of interesting because I feel like it's such a common, I don't know, like phrase you hear kind of parroted that everyone's experience is different. That's definitely true for everything, but I don't know, it's gotten to the point where apparently your experience can be so different that sometimes I have to be careful almost who I'm like really open with sharing my experience with because it doesn't really line up with what I think a lot of people want to hear. Um, Now, currently in 2023, anyways, which is weird because it changed very rapidly, but pretty much it was kind of uh, an early onset for me before I ever was even old enough to have any kind of language or even know anything about LGBT at all. I just had gender dysphoria, which I now know is what it was. At the time, of course, I just was uncomfortable. Like anytime as a little kid, I'd play a game like family or house, or if we were pretending to be dogs or something, I'd be like, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna pretend to be a boy dog. My friends would be like, that's weird, but okay. And just sort of things like that. And I had a lot of discomfort around like meeting new people and introducing myself with like my previous name was like a pretty like much a strictly female name. Introducing myself as that and having new people just I don't know, call me like young lady, she and her, and surrounding my own body as well, even before puberty, but especially after puberty, having other people point things out, like I don't know, having to think about having long hair and having my mom brush it and style it as a little kid, and then having to learn to do it myself. Never was into makeup or anything. I always resisted like trying to wear anything that showed off my body at all once I was like more of a teenager. And just very strong feelings of gender dysphoria. I always would like pray so hard before I went to bed that I could just wake up and magically boom be a boy and have everyone in my life just know I always had been, and I didn't even have to explain it to anyone. Um, and of course, as I think most Gen Z kids do, by the time I was about 12, I started like Googling how I was feeling to see like what's going on. And I kind of had heard of like gay people and stuff by then, but uh I saw this like little form where someone was describing pretty much exactly what I've been feeling, but they were like, uh, you know, I don't know, it's just felt very accurate. I was like, oh wow. So I wrote down and saw what people were responding to this person saying, and they were all like, yeah, kind of sounds like you're transgender. And I was like, what's that? So then I'm Googling what transgender means, which is probably not the most ideal way to learn about it, but that's the resource I had. And I read the definition of transgender. I was like, my initial reaction honestly was that's really weird and crazy. But like I don't think I could be that, but it does sound exactly like what I'm going through. So I just kind of put it out of sight, out of mind. And of course, I was what 12 when I kind of first learned that, and about a year later, it was always in the back of my head, kind of haunting me. I was like, that was such a good definition, and still day to day, I'm still dealing with this. You finish elementary, you go to junior high, I meet new people, new teachers. I have to introduce myself. Maybe I'm making like a Google account, some video game accounts at the time. I have to sign up with my legal name, which is like, like I said, a female name, which that alone caused me dysphoria. And it made me not want to make friends, not want to go out or do anything because I felt like just having to go out and deal with anything at all was already hard enough for everyone. But then I had to deal with that added stress just like crushing down on me. So it made everything like 10 times harder for no reason. And yeah, I did try to come out when I was 13, just not just like come out, but just like explain, hey, I learned this definition of this thing. I've been struggling with this my whole life. Like, this is how I'm feeling. I didn't even really realize transition was a thing. I think I kind of did to some extent. Um, did not get a good reaction from family when I was 13. So I kind of went back in the closet, just sucked it up. I tried to avoid making friends because I was like, well, one day when I'm an adult, I'm going to come out, and then I don't want to have a lot of people to come out to. Um, in case, some people might not be accepting, I'd rather no one know me at all, and I can just meet new people when I'm an adult and can change my name or something. And when I was about to turn 17, I was kind of planning to just wait till I was 18, but my dysphoria was getting so bad. I had dropped out of high school and gone to online classes. This was before COVID, so that was like abnormal at that time, just to avoid people. And yeah, I really couldn't take it anymore. I was having a lot of suicidal thoughts and stuff. And so I came out to my parents again, like re-came out. And this time I guess they had time to think about it. And we had been through a lot as a family since then, so I guess it wasn't as big of a shock anymore. And I asked for like their help and support in the journey. And luckily they did agree to give their support. So this is where I think my experience has been interesting because I did transition as a minor, and now like looking back, as recently there's a lot of controversy surrounding that, and I understand why. So it's kind of hard for me to give like 100% opinion on that. I kind of go back and forth. Um, because I know it was extremely successful for me so far. Obviously, I'm very young, and so sometimes it's a little interesting to think what those effects might be later on in life, after decades. But it was successful, and treating my gender dysphoria really. And the process I went through, I don't know if we want to get into that right away, but I feel like it was pretty thorough, and I was really satisfied with the level of care I received from my doctor. Um, and then it's been more like the pharmacist and kind of family doctor I've had since then, not the doctor who, um, the endocrinologist who actually prescribes HRT and stuff, but the other doctors, they don't really understand what trans is. And I find that's where a lot of the poor healthcare I've been receiving comes from. But I do live in a conservative province, so that might have more to do with like why that was a different experience for me than let's say someone in maybe a more left-leaning state, in terms of accessing like HRT and transition. So yeah, that was
In,
my experience with it. Yeah. And then I got into the transition when I was like almost 17 now, just still 16.
yeah, the process seems to be quite different from province to province in Canada because each province is responsible for the design and delivery of their own healthcare system. So I know, for example, I don't think it was always the case, but in recent years, the province of Alberta requires that a psychiatrist do all the hormone readiness assessments, whereas in BC, pretty much anyone can do it, like a doctor, nurse practitioner, nurse, counselor,
Oh,
social worker. So it can be really, really different. And then those are just two provinces side by side each other, and there's that much difference in how care is delivered. So what you mentioned the process was thorough. So I would be interested in hearing what that process was like for you.
for sure, yeah. And that's interesting you mentioned that about BC because I didn't know that. I mean, I kind of could figure based on, just what you hear about what's going on out there, but I don't know, because like you said in Alberta, I did have to see a psychologist for a few sessions. So after I came out to my parents, they took me to see one. We just kind of researched which ones are kind of supportive to LGBT and found one at a convenient location. Went, I did a few sessions. I liked her. She's like, yeah, we have to do at least 6 sessions or something before I can know you enough to be comfortable giving you a diagnosis, or maybe it was 10, something like that. So I did the sessions and she kind of agreed or diagnosed, you could say, me with what she believed was definitely gender dysphoria. And she recommended me to a doctor here who, I don't want to say he's a technically an endocrinologist, but that's he just kind of specializes in transgender people and like managing HRT for them. Um, So she gave me his information. I called his clinic, booked in, and he does a thing where I believe you do 3 initial appointments before he prescribes anything. So the very first one is like just any kind of typical doctor thing that you would do, where you give your medical history, you just go over all your up-to-date like medication, everything with the doctor. He gets to know you a bit, gets all your information down, and then asks a little bit about like if you were to medically transition, like what your goals would be and why you're interested. And then he kind of sends you home, you come back, you book another appointment for whatever the next month, and he does his own kind of psychological assessment, kind of similar to what the therapist or psychologist was doing, but pretty much he just does his own like fast-paced version of it in just like the one appointment for an hour or so. Just assessing like whether he believes you actually have gender dysphoria. And if he does, then he sends you home. You book the next appointment. He gives you a little information. You go back for the next appointment, and this time he goes over like in depth the effects of like hormone treatment. You get like a book that you have to go over. And as a minor, I got an informed consent form to sign that I had to sign, both of my parents had to sign, and a witness other than my parents had to also sign, and the doctor himself as well. So he goes over all the information about like, the potential risks, explains, which I think some people aren't getting explained nowadays, that you can't, when you go on testosterone, you can't pick and choose. You can't just get the deep voice. You're also going to get the body hair, facial hair, the sweat, everything. Like you can't pick and choose. You're going to get all of it. So he's pretty thorough about that and the potential fertility risks. Of course, that's not something that I could really afford would even necessarily be interested in, but I was offered to like have things set aside for the future in terms of fertility. And then he kind of sends you home with that information and a blood test requisition to make sure everything is in order with your kidneys, liver, blood levels, everything. So you kind of go home, you can read over the pamphlet. I talked to my parents, we all went over it, we all signed it. I got my aunt to be our witness, and I talked to her about it as well. Luckily, my family's very supportive now at this point. And yeah, then I did the blood work. When it all came back, I booked my next appointment with him. And then on that fourth appointment, that's when he kind of just goes over the paperwork that you signed and then gives you the prescription for the testosterone. And he also showed me how to like do the injection as well. So I felt like I was in good hands, and I always was able to reach him and follow up once I was a patient of his with fairly short wait time. Because there was initially quite a few months wait, I think, from when I first called to book the appointment versus when I got my first appointment with him. And then, of course, you have a couple more after that. So, yeah, that was how that went. And
How long did that whole process take from start to finish?
it took about a year, or yeah, because I came out right when I turned 16, and then I was still 16 when I had my first testosterone injection, but I was almost 17. So maybe 11 months,
Did you feel
which
like
I
that
did.
the fact that there was a process and you were asked so many questions and had to see a few different people and it took almost a year from the time you made the decision to actually getting hormones, did you feel like that was too long, or was that helpful, or was it helpful talking it through with the clinicians? What was your sort of take and experience?
At the time, in the moment, I definitely felt like it was too long, and I did kind of, I won't lie, like rush through it. Like anytime I'd call to book my next appointment, I'd be like, yeah, what's the soonest date you have available? I'll make time, rather than just, maybe taking the extra week. Like I definitely kind of powered through it on purpose pretty fast. I think on average it'd probably take a little longer if you weren't like rushing your each appointment. But looking back on it now, I'm really pleased with that, and it leaves me with a good taste in my mouth about like my doctor and the people, my parents, my aunt, my family who supported me. So I'm glad I took that time because I feel like I was, as a minor, there's only so much you can say about like how much you can take on that sort of risk. But I feel like I was given every possible like chance to understand, and like you said, I was talked to a lot about a lot of things through it and in front of everything. So I feel like to that extent, they did give me that opportunity to make as informed consent decision about my body and my future that I could as a minor. And I'm still happy with the decision to this day. Maybe if I wasn't, I'd feel differently. But I do think like a lot of things I hear is like some trans people, they end up with side effects from the hormones that they don't like. And they're like, oh, well, I have like this facial hair now. I have this thick body hair. I have this like sweatiness. And then of course, not to mention like the actual health risks of like potential high cholesterol and all kinds of things that we don't know what hormones can do after long-term use. But or even like infertility. And like my doctor never told me this is a possibility. I just thought my voice was gonna get deeper and that was it. And it's like I definitely was made aware of like all kinds of obscure little details of things that testosterone can do. So I was fully aware of everything that was going to happen, and nothing happened that wasn't discussed with my doctor beforehand. So.
Sounds like the doctor was fairly well informed then, if they were, even going into the tiny details of the more obscure, uncommon side effects.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was definitely grateful for that. It helped me make my decision at the end of the day. So
Did you have to pay out of pocket to see the psychologist?
I did. I think mm, about halfway through, we did end up buying some private insurance, which ended up covering like 90% of the second half of all the visits. So that was definitely the big thing that hurt with having to pay for all those visits. But I mean, at the end of the day, uh, I think it's worth it to go through that process, not just because of, making sure you have an official diagnosis of gender dysphoria, but also I think most people can benefit from seeing a psychologist, especially when you are dealing with like what I believe is a condition. I think that's a bit controversial to say, but it is a mental health condition, and it's good to be getting treatment for it and learning like some coping methods as well as not just all physical transition, but mentally coping as well with the dysphoria.
Was it ever discussed with you? Probably more so. I'm thinking the psychologist. Was it ever discussed with you? Like, did anyone ever teach you like what is gender dysphoria and offer you any alternatives for managing it?
That is something that was brought up, but definitely wasn't really pushed or gone into depth with at all, which is a good question because knowing me at the time, I probably would and I did when they kind of mentioned like, you can learn. I think when I kind of had my first session, they were like, yeah, you can also learn to like manage the dysphoria as well, like through like CBT and stuff and just different coping methods as well. And I was kind of like, yeah, yeah, okay, anyways, which was probably kind of my own fault, in a way I kind of rushed through. But they definitely didn't go into depth, no, about like what causes gender dysphoria or other, types of it or other experiences with it or other possibilities. So yeah,
How
definitely
did
interesting.
they? Yeah, how did they explain it to you?
They honestly didn't really,
Mhm.
which looking back, I don't know if they even know the answer or if anyone even really 100% knows the answer. Unfortunately, it seems to be kind of under researched, which is a shame because a lot of people currently probably don't want it to get much more research. They just want it to go away and just anyone can just be trans. So um, I think they kind of just explained it as um, something kind of along the lines of like a mismatch between your brain and your body and it causing distress and you have to kind of like come to terms accepting your body and like, I learned a little bit about like the structure of the brain, how we have like our mammal brain, our human brain, and how sometimes like logic versus your natural instinctive things is like mismatched, and using cognitive behavioral therapy, you can kind of learn to like manage these symptoms and this anxiety about it. But that's more of kind of a general thing for people experiencing anxiety of any sort, not just caused by gender dysphoria. So I would say, in terms of the psychological aspect of things, there's definitely a lot lacking. I'm not sure if I can blame my psychologist for that, or if just it's just the state of like how much knowledge we as a society have on the topic. But yeah, definitely didn't give me too much information in depth, and that's why it was very interesting to like run into Gender Dysphoria Alliance, because seeing the different types. I'm still not 100% sure which type of dysphoria I would fit in as having, but it's interesting at least that there's a conversation being had about this finally.
Yeah, I mean, you're right that I would love for there to be more research to really, understand these things in depth. But there's more research out there than I think people realize that just isn't being promoted because it's contrary to the activist narrative. So it's
Big shame.
unfortunate. It's unfortunate that what available information about a condition we have, because I feel strongly that patients have a right to evidence-based information about the condition we're being treated for. And so it's a
Yeah.
shame that they're kind of being muzzled, and not providing us with that information.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a big shame. And um, I think in one of my messages when I reached out to you guys, I was saying, like, it makes me concerned for a lot of things, but the future of us accessing healthcare as like transsexuals is concerning when that narrative is being pushed so hard, because if it's not a medical condition, it's not a mental condition, then why are we receiving medical treatment for it of any sort? And so if that's the narrative they want to push, but at the same time they want anyone who maybe feels gender nonconforming to transition, it's like, well, that doesn't like how can both be true? And then of course our healthcare system is getting overwhelmed by these people who, at the end of the day, who knows how many of them may end up transitioning or regretting it, and it's kind of sad. And there's people with genuine, like, really strong dysphoria who could benefit from transition who have a harder time accessing it now because of that. So it's definitely a big shame what's happening right now to our healthcare, like in terms of the narrative and around trans people. So
Just circling back to something Daniel said a little bit earlier ago, it's like how when you were first accessing uh, healthcare for it, you said, because you were in a more conservative province, that's probably why you got better trans-related healthcare than somebody in a progressive province, which is just kind of like, that's, I mean, I can obviously intuitively understand why that's the case, but I think that's kind of just a really surprising thing to hear in that.
yeah,
But I think we all know what you mean. Yeah.
I know,
So,
right? Yeah, you're right. Looking back on that, that's the sentence you probably wouldn't typically hear, but yeah, I mean,
because yeah, we know how it is now in more progressive areas where it's like, yeah, asking any questions about your experience or um, going into too much detail about maybe negative side effects of testosterone or whatnot, it's like that's seen as a form of transphobia, and
yeah.
therefore only in a more conservative place are you're going to get proper thorough um, yeah information and questions and yeah yada yada.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those instances where, and I don't know, not to sound like like I don't know, too like political extremist or anything, but it's one of those instances where like some people have gone so extremely to the left and like trying to be very woke and politically correct that they've come full circle and actually come back around on the conservative side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always a
Yeah.
swinging pendulum, isn't it? I mean, I always say, the left and the right are just two legs taking a step, right? And when we go too far to the left, it ends up swinging to the right. And I think the two naturally balance each other, which, and I think our
Yes.
societies tend to kind of fall a roughly 50% left wing or right wing, and just naturally, right? And So I think they're two necessary counterbalances for each other, which is why I've always tried to sit in the middle. I think in the US, I would be called a swing state voter, I think, because I always watch for, are we swaying too far in one direction or another? And so I'm a fairly moderate voter, and I'll vote according to where I feel like the pendulum needs to swing. If it becomes too extreme, which is happening in our society right now, where the left is becoming so extreme that the right is also becoming very extreme, right? Because they have to balance one another. So
Yes.
if you want your opponent to be less extreme, you have to be less extreme yourself, and that's what we're trying to do as the Gender Dysphoria Alliance, is trying to bring people into the middle rather than this extreme polarization where there's so many distortions on either extreme end and so much suspicion and dehumanization of your political opponents rather than seeing each other as necessary and helpful counterbalances.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. And of course, I've only been, of age to vote for a few years, but I have noticed that as well, just in these last few years. And I would agree with you where I try to stand more in the middle because you can't have understanding on both sides if, you don't try to hear them both out and take a little bit of the good ideas from both sides and try and be the best you can be. I mean, it shouldn't all be black and white, right?
What Aaron was saying earlier about it, isn't it ironic that in a conservative province, that's where you're getting better care, at least better by our definition. But Alberta was also one of the first provinces to provide medical coverage for the procedures. I think even
Yeah.
before BC was covering it all, Alberta was already covering trans health care under the health insurance program.
Yeah, I was a bit surprised when I was actually doing research that like most of it was covered under just the general healthcare here. So I mean, I think that's a good thing. It's surprising, but it's a good thing.
But before you were offered any explanation of what gender dysphoria was, how were you making sense of it for yourself? Were you just confused about it, or did you try to kind of piece together what it meant and what it was?
I definitely tried, but I was also confused about it. It was the kind of thing where I would try to challenge myself. Um, you know, at the time, there was a lot of like, even then, there was videos popping up on YouTube and stuff like, oh, cringe compilation, like transgender like person does and this and something, and I'd watch that and like see all these, people who are on the other extreme of the spectrum who are like really against trans people, like just mocking us and stuff like that, and I'd try and challenge it and be like, well, do these people have like any valid reason for some of these critiques? And a lot of them are just people being rude on the internet. But sometimes I would try and question things like people saying, oh, you'll never just because this person looks like this and did all the hormones they want, they'll never actually be a woman or a man or whatever it is. And I try and kind of question that, come to terms with that. Like, am I really sitting here like believing that I'm genuinely a biological male? No, I know there's differences, and you can't change your sex. But I do like the term transsexual because I think it aligns more with what my goal is in transition. Of course, it's not literal though. It's its own thing. Like a trans man's a trans man, a biological man's a biological man. And I would just try to like question myself and be like, is this I don't know, like is this something I really believe? Like when these people say, oh, these trans people are so delusional and stuff, I'd be like, am I delusional? I don't know. Like I try and question it, always just be aware of myself. And in terms of the dysphoria specifically that I was experiencing, I don't even know. It was just always there and just all I know is it's pretty painful to go through, and transitioning has helped immensely, um and given me a new kind of outlook on life. I'm more comfortable with things I never would have been comfortable before, and it just makes things easier. Like I can just go out and deal with hard situations, like at work. I'm in university, I can just go to school and just do my thing, whether it's meeting new people or doing something even like this podcast or buying a new car, anything. I can just go out. It's so much easier because I can, I can sign my name. It's a male name. I have changed my name legally and changed my gender marker legally on all my documents. So it almost felt before like I felt like a bit ashamed or embarrassed or awkward to have like a female name because it felt like wrong. It just felt wrong and it felt uncomfortable and painful. And of course, I felt that way about like my body as well. But what always was hard for me to come to understanding with, and still to this day, is that in terms of like how like sexuality and gender roles and all that sort of thing can come into it, because I know there's a lot of discussion around the topic of like autoandrophilia. I think that's how you pronounce it. And things like that, and like homosexual, transsexual, and stuff like that. For me, I always have considered myself bisexual. Before and after transition, there was really no change. There's really never been any preference or differences before or after hormones. It's just always kind of been that way. It ended up being kind of not a big deal because coming out as trans kind of overshadows that. And at that point, my whole family and friends were like, "I don't know what you're doing, but yeah, whatever." Yeah. So, uh, but yeah, it's just confusing. It's hard to understand for sure. Like, I guess that's why just believing that it's a mental health kind of condition, disorder, whatever you want to call it, it brings me some comfort because, like, maybe, something's just off in there, whether it's hormonally or whatever it may be. But I have this strong sense of gender dysphoria, and yeah, I just always have.
How long after starting hormones did you get surgeries?
I actually have not had any surgeries.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of go back and forth on those. Just because I'm still pretty young, and if I were to go through something like that, I'd rather put it off to when I'm a little older. And I have been on a wait list for top surgery for a couple years or a year or something, but every so often, I'm like, should I call and like get off the wait list? Like, I don't know. Like, but then I'm like, no, I kind of want to do it when my position comes up on the wait list. No, I go back for it. Mostly what's stopping me is I'm just scared of needles, and which is ironic because I take HRT, but IVs, being put under anesthesia, surgery. I mean, I was too scared to get my wisdom teeth removed. Like, I haven't got them removed. I was just terrified of that type of thing more than anything. But of course, like the gender dysphoria is so like hard. Like, it's just so painful. That it's like the thought of that is nice. I'm lucky that I'm quite just slim naturally. Like, I've never had to bind or anything, and I can wear whatever I want. And it's pretty much just if I wanted to go shirtless in a pool or something, and then I'm like, is it worth it to get surgery for that? I don't know. So when the day comes, I get the phone call that my position is up in the wait list. Hopefully it's farther in the future, and I'll have made up my mind with them. But I think if I'm not 100% sure, I'm just not going to do it unless I am. I can always get on the wait list again and do it
Mhm.
later in life. So I also saw a thing when I was getting a blood test one day that was very interesting to me, and I'm not sure if this is something that's ever talked about, but I didn't know this until I literally was getting this blood test like a month or two ago. It said on a little pamphlet in the booth, please inform the person drawing your blood if you've ever had a mastectomy. And I was like, why would that be? And I researched it, and it can kind of have, I couldn't even really find a clear answer, but it can have some sort of effect on like your veins in your arm if you've had a mastectomy. And I was like, whoa, okay, well, that's something I've never been informed of. So
I've never heard
that
that.
also made me
Me
concerned.
either.
No,
No,
I've never
okay.
heard that. No. Interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting. So definitely something yeah, I'm glad to let you guys know about it. I mean, obviously, lots of people have had a mastectomy, and I'm sure they've had blood tests after and been fine. But for some reason, they had that pamphlet. They said you better let us know if you had one. So
I wonder if it
I'm not
makes a
really sure if
difference if it's the radical mastectomy that they would do for cancer or the mastectomy that they do for trans guys. Because I don't think with trans guys they remove like lymph nodes and stuff.
that's true too. So
Ooh.
I guess that would probably have an effect, but just was interesting because I saw that and I was like, if I had had top surgery at this point, what I guess I would have to let them know right now, and I don't know what that would mean for me. Like,
Hmm.
why is the sign up? That's kind of concerning.
It's
So
interesting.
I just, yeah, I don't know if that's like new research or what, because I've, had a lot of blood tests before, and I never saw that sign up until like a month or two ago.
Yeah, I wonder if new science, new data is emerging with just how many of us are
Maybe.
getting that
Right.
procedure.
Yeah.
That I mean, it makes sense. I mean, as far as your circulatory system, I guess. Like anyway, I'm brain just buzzing on this. I'm going to do some research now. That's very very fascinating.
If you find anything,
So
Absolutely.
like
Yeah.
let's
blood volume or something.
yeah. If
Yeah,
you find anything, let's link it into our show notes. But yeah, I've
yeah,
never seen
yeah.
a sign or a form or anything like that. And I've had blood work for tons of blood work for years.
Right, but
I
he's
know,
saying he
right?
just saw it, what, like just a few months ago, right? That's
Yeah.
and I'm thinking that it's like
Maybe
it
a
makes
new thing.
sense that this is something that's now being observed and realize uh that there's a different something's going on there because it's been quite a while since I've had blood work done. My doctor's very bad. I have to be very proactive about that. I'm like, hey, it's been like 2 years. Let's check my
Oh,
blood, So uh,
oh no.
that's next month finally. But yeah. Anyway, I might I might ask the phlebotomist now about that actually.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll shoot you guys an email if I find out any more information about it. But I've had a hard time even Googling it, finding much. So I'm definitely leaning towards this, might be something new. Um,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Being on the surgery wait list, have they talked to you about which method of the mastectomy they would do? Like, would it be keyhole or the?
yeah, I think I haven't been officially seen by a surgeon, just by the doctor who prescribes the HRT and is the one who has the authority to put me on the wait list. And just, yeah, it would probably be the keyhole surgery, which I've been pretty informed on how that surgery goes and the complications, but now I'm seeing this thing about the blood tests and stuff. I'm like, oh, okay. uh,
Oh,
yeah, it's just I think it's more of my concern is just that I mean any type of and I see this kind of reflected a lot in a lot of people who are actually not super for trans people, but they're like, any kind of surgery for something that's already healthy, it's a kind of extreme measure to go to. And I just kind of agree with that just because I'm scared of surgery. Like if I wasn't so like horrified by the thought of being like put under and like having surgery, that's my only reservation for it, rather than like something relating to like gender dysphoria or regret of transition or anything like that. But I think that's something that we should be allowed to feel that way. I mean, we are always told what we should think as trans people. So I don't know. I mean, if it's something related to just my health and not my gender identity, I mean, that's my decision as a human, not as a trans person. Right? So that's how I think of it. So still,
mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you can just kind of like function day to day, very basically comfortably, and not stress about that facet of your body all that much, then definitely just don't. There's no need unless it's like really really yeah. It's just I would say yeah, don't try to pressure yourself into doing something that really just doesn't feel like it's all that necessary.
It, exactly. Yeah. That's where I'm sitting too. And I mean, I have, my whole life ahead of me. If I change my mind in even 10 years, I
Mm-hmm.
can always do it. So I'd rather hold off because you can't really undo it once it's done, but you can choose to do
Mm-hmm.
it later.
Mhm. I don't know
For
as
sure.
much about keyhole 'cause I had the double incision one, and most of the people that I know did because they transitioned later in life had larger breasts and needed the double incision. But so I don't know as much about keyhole and if there are as many complications. But I know a double incision. I mean, guys talk about having a lot of like nerve pain or numbness. I mean, I still don't have much of any feeling along my incision lines and scar tissue under my underarm. So it's not a medically. I'm not unhappy I did it for myself personally, but it's not like it's medically neutral and there are no problems. And I do know guys, they went through all the trouble and they still won't go swimming without a shirt because of the amount of scar tissue or something about the aesthetic result that they don't really like or being outed by scars. So it seems like a lot of the younger kids don't seem to mind outing them. So they almost want scars. It's almost like this signaling I am trans to show off their scars. That's a change, right? Because I mean, the older guys that I knew, the last thing they wanted was for someone to, to out themselves. So they were afraid to show their scars because that would out them.
Absolutely, yeah, I've seen that as well. I've seen a little bit of a trend going on there. There's like this compilation video where people were like showing off the scars, yeah, and there was a lot of people who otherwise looked very traditionally feminine, in terms of like their body, the way they dress, everything. They're like, anyone can get top surgery, even if you're like, a feminine non-binary person or something. I was like, what? I don't know. I mean, I'm not gonna just say people can't do what they want with their body, but I don't think that's a very good narrative to push because, like you said, it's kind of goes against what I would feel. My natural instinct as a trans person would be exactly that. Like, I wouldn't want to be outed by scars. I mean, I think keyhole incision, it's a much harder scar to see, but um, I still wouldn't want to be outed by it, and I wouldn't really necessarily want to show it off like that and like be like, yeah, I'm trans, look at me, It's kind of the goal of transition for me, at least, is to just pass and fit into society, and so
There are
that was
two
my
ways of
goal.
being trans that are very at odds with one another, and like competing and contradictory goals. Whereas the ones that are just trying to pass and they almost don't want anyone to know what our scars are about, because if everyone is educated about what these scars are about, it immediately outs us. So the ones that are, kind of signaling to everyone, you look at my scars and this is what it means, and wearing sort of that trans banner around everywhere they go, it really um it completely undermines and contradicts what those that are just trying to pass and aren't trying to draw attention to themselves. Like, so there's this tension in the community, and it seems to be a growing tension as there seem to be more and more and more of those wanting to wave the trans flag and announce that they're trans everywhere. There's more and more and more of them, and it seems to be starting to really put a lot of pressure on those that were just trying to live stealth and blend in and get on with their lives.
Yeah. I hate to say it, but even it's almost there's a certain subgroup within that group that will straight up shame in a way, like you could say binary trans people or transsexuals or FTMs and FTFs who are generally just trying to pass. And that's just their goal, is just to pass and kind of fit in with society and meet society where it's at. Um, you're almost, yeah, ashamed for that. It's like, oh, you're just like the quote unquote cis people, like performing gender stereotypes or however they say it. And it's like, I mean, I'm not just like the cis people because I kind of don't like that word, but for lack of a better word, it's like our experiences are different, and uh, it's like yeah, a bit of a war. And then a lot of people who are like down on, the biological men and women too, and they're like don't even want to talk to them, and they just hate on them, like, oh, down with cis or whatever. It's like all my friends and family are that, so I love cis people. Nothing wrong with that. Like, and I think there's nothing wrong with saying I'm not that. I'm not a biological man, and I'm a trans man. And there was a time where I think it would have been nice to be able to, in a private setting with maybe family or friends, be proud of your top surgery scar, your transition, and just because it just shows from where you came from and how far you've made it in your transition. And now it's not even like it's something you can have any sort of happiness about or be proud of, because it's like, yeah, you're shamed for wanting to like pass and fit in with society. It's like, oh, you shouldn't care about gender, you should just appear however. It's like, if you just appear however, then how come every non-binary person wants to take hormones? But it's
Heard
a
of you,
lot of contradictions.
yeah,
It's very
I've
hard to
heard of
navigate.
young people, and I mean, I haven't found solid evidence of this, but I've heard stories of young people actually going back to surgeons and asking for their surgery scars to be reopened, and then so that they would scar more, so that their scars were more visible.
Oh boy.
Holy
I
hell.
hope the surgeons don't do that request. That seems pretty extreme. I don't know.
Yeah, it sort of goes along with the heart-shaped nipples or the star-shaped nipples, or doing
Oh
things
boy.
that don't look natural. goes along with just that, advertising
like
their alternate identity.
The no nipples, and then they'll actually ask for one solid scar, and then the surgeon. So rather than having, two scars for each, each incision, they ask for a solid scar across the bottom of their chest and no nipples, and the surgeon gives them that. Like it's really disturbing that. Yeah. I don't understand what's going on in these, these surgeons are. Yeah, I don't understand what they're thinking or what they're doing.
Yeah.
Other than dollar signs.
I had to have the single scar just because I did because I was getting the sort of pocketing in the center where the two incision lines met. He was
okay.
It was about, I don't know, about 1.5 inches between where the two incision lines were and originally. And he said normally that creates this like almost like a little flap, like a pouch in the middle of your chest. So he tried to deal with that kind of almost like a dog ear that we get under our arms. It was like in the center. So he tried to get rid of that by stitching it down to my chest wall. So it ended up looking like I had a belly button right in the center of my chest. And he wasn't sure how to get rid of that. And I said, well, why don't you just cut it out, right? So I ended up having fortunately that part didn't really scar much, so it's not really a visible scar, but I do have the incision line right from armpit right across to the other armpit. But I was disappointed, right, that I had to have a bigger scar than average. And you're right. I mean, these kids now want the biggest scar possible and the most visible scar possible. So it's such a completely, talk about pendulum swinging, right? It went from let's be as discreet and subtle as possible to let's be as extreme and out there and obvious as possible.
At that point, not only does that sound like just an increased infection risk for no reason, so I don't know why surgeons are doing that, but it also seems to just be a form of body modification in the same way, like certain subgenres of people like punks and stuff like that would do. I don't know if that's the right word, but people who do like the ear gauges and lots of tattoos, tattoo their eyeballs or something crazy. Like it's almost kind of just something along those lines for some people, and that's like if they want to do that, I mean, and maybe they can pay a private surgeon to do that. I mean, I guess who am I to stop them? But they shouldn't label it trans or group us in with that at that point, like the heart-shaped nipples or no nipples, something like that. Just to me, it just really rings like a body modification.
Well, I mean, there's two pieces to transition. I mean, and it is complicated because adults, if they're reasonably sane adults should have bodily autonomy. So I mean, I kind of believe that to a certain degree. Like what other people do is if they're not hurting anybody, even if I disagree with their decisions, if it's not up to me to dictate how other people should live their lives or what to do with their bodies. But there's also the legal fiction part, right? Getting your ID changed. And I don't know that people should be able to just opt into the legal fiction willy-nilly with no assessment, because that seems like a separate issue to me. And I think that is what's hurting our community more than letting people do it with whatever they want with their bodies. I mean, people can identify however they want. They can do with their bodies what they want as adults. But when you grant people the legal fiction, which gives them access into, certain privileges of the opposite sex, I think our society needs some gatekeeping around that. And I think we as a trans community need some gatekeeping around that, because the more and more people that are abusing that legal fiction, whether it's, I don't know, male sexual predators playing the trans card, and they're not even trans or dysphoric, but they play the trans card to get into women's changing rooms. I mean, there was an incident in BC a few months ago of a registered sex offender, not a trans woman, just a male registered sex offender, walked into a women's and girls changing room, and a mom caught him peeping at some naked girls in the change room. And when she complained to staff, they said she was being transphobic. And they involved the police. And originally it was a discrimination case. that this mom was so transphobic. And then it was discovered when the police ran a background check on the individual, realized he was a registered sex offender. So that's the legal fiction part, right? Is because that individual hadn't taken hormones or didn't have any surgeries, but was taking advantage of the legal fiction that's been granted to us as a part of our treatment. When you take advantage of that, that hurts all of us. And I think there should actually be laws against people that abuse the system like that.
Yeah, I definitely agree that, like you said, adults should be able to identify however they want, do whatever they want with their body, as long as, they're sane and that's what they're happy with and they're informed. But it definitely gets to a point when it affects other people. So when, exactly like you said, the legal fiction, when they're starting to invade, like, women and girls spaces, or they're, I shouldn't say anything. Some people are going to take offense to that, but I mean, these people who aren't really trans using that as a way, as a gate to get in, and people, you know, getting kind of touchy about, like, maybe pronouns or something when they haven't really transitioned or done anything, and they expect you to know their pronouns, and then they get really mad and then get someone fired or something. It's like, oh, could I know that? Just things like that where they start to infringe on other people's freedom and on their lives. It's like that's when it, I think, cross the line, and there should be laws against that to an extent. Like, I think in Canada, it's like considered illegal to like misgender someone, or like because it's considered transphobic, and that's like a protected demographic. So it's like if you see someone who identifies as like a they them, but they haven't transitioned at all, they look just fully like a random like woman or something. You say they them, like that's a hate crime, or you don't say they them, it's a hate crime now. It's like, okay, that should not be legal because that is infringing on everyone else's rights of like freedom. So
Speaking of, like, the whole legal fiction thing, Aaron, I think there's some guy in Denmark did a brilliant experiment where he changed his legal sex to female because he wanted the cheaper car insurance. I'm sure if you guys have heard this story, but that's brilliant. I mean, like, but he benefits and he draws attention to how just fucking ridiculous this can be.
That was in the newspapers in Alberta last year.
Okay.
That he did that. Yeah.
Oh, I actually didn't see that, but that's pretty comedic. I mean, holy.
You said that you were that you hadn't been an activist previously, but you feel compelled to step forward and say something. So what was it that motivated that?
I think there's a couple of things. Part of it is just, existing in the world as it is. You see things online, you hear things in person, in the news, on both ends of the extreme side of like how people feel trans people. People who are so against it that they see any news about trans people, like, we should just kill them all. And then some people who are so on the other side where they're like, yeah, like, if you've heard of like xenogenders and stuff, where they're like making up genders, like new genders, and just like really, really like deep in that rabbit hole. And both of them completely just abhor the other side. And I was like, okay, I definitely don't agree with either extreme, and I can see some points on both kind of sides. Um, for me, it's not even political. It's just my day-to-day life. It's just a mental condition I have, and it's just reality. Although it doesn't really affect me much. Like, it's something I think about very rarely because, like I said, I'm South, and it kind of is irrelevant. Like, my close friends to me know, and family knows, and they're cool with it, and it just is what it is. But um, when these things come up in like the media and whatnot, it's just, I have all these thoughts in my head where, like, I don't see anyone saying what I'm thinking. Not that there's no one who like thinks like me, but I feel like people are so, they just have to be so extreme or the other, and people who are in the center either don't speak out because they're scared, or just aren't politically active, or, even sometimes I feel like maybe there's certain kind of obscure things that maybe not a lot of people have considered or thought about, because, when you're living every day as a trans person, sometimes you think of things that, that, it's all new. Like, there's not a whole lot of like really in-depth understanding and research about it. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to kind of add to the discussion more in the center. Like, I'm in support of genuine, transsexuals with gender dysphoria, but not, um, with a little bit of gatekeeping involved, I guess you could say, like with the legal fiction and just wanting to protect same-sex spaces and wanting to acknowledge our experience as, transsexual people. And it seems almost transphobic to me that some people want to say trans women are women and trans men are men because it's actually like you're erasing our experience and what we go through, our medical journey, our self-discovery journey, self-acceptance, the psychological needs we have, mental needs we have, to say that we're just normal men. It's like, well, okay, if I was just born a biological man, why did I go through all of that? Like, it's kind of like erasing our experience and not allowing us to have our own thing, which is kind of a unique thing just to trans men, trans women, and as opposed to biological men and women. And um, yeah, I feel like that is more transphobic than what they're saying we're doing.
I agree.
So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you as well. I mean, it's a unique experience that kind of gets erased if you just sort of say, well, I'm no different than cis male. You're right that it does erase that whole experience and the uniqueness of this experience. Gender dysphoria becomes a completely
I like to tell the
meaningless
activists,
concept.
I like to tell the activists that they're erasing my transness.
Oh, that's a good one. I'd like to hear how they respond to
uh, just the usual kind of changing the subject because
that.
I'm in frequent debates with people who do what you're saying, where it's like they want to deny deny the reality of our sex. And when I'm saying no, it's like the reality of our sex is very vital to not just our transition, but like the reality of our lives, still in a lot of cases. And uh, basically, I'm just kind of being a dick by using their language to make my point. Oh.
I like that. That's a good one.
Well, I really appreciate that you have stepped forward. I mean, that's one of the things I think I love most about what we're doing here is that we get to have so many great conversations with people like yourself. So I really appreciated that you stepped forward to kind of say many of the same things that we believe in. Like we don't believe that we've literally changed sex. The treatment helps some people, but it doesn't help by literally changing sex. And I think you're fairly self-aware in the sense that you recognize your biological reality. You're aware of your sexual orientation. You are aware of the potential risks of these treatments. You're obviously taking your time to think it all through and not rush decisions. So that it sounds like you've had a good care team and that you're approaching it with some really good sense and self-awareness.
Thank you very much for saying so. Yeah, I would like to think so. And every day I hear more stories. I'm more grateful for the care team I had, and you know, maybe they weren't perfect in 100% in every area. Maybe some more information about what causes gender dysphoria and stuff would be great. But I mean, I'm here today, and um, I found Gender Dysphoria Alliance, so I guess I found out one way or the other. But they were really good with the information they had available, and yeah, it's been like definitely transition was a huge move for me. It's not 100% cure for gender dysphoria, but it's like a 95% cure in my case it was. Not for everyone obviously, but for me it was, and definitely a lifesaver, life changer. And yeah, it's great to have a conversation with people who are like-minded because of course everyone I know is just biological man or woman, and so I mean I don't really want to burn them without all that. They don't really understand, and then the people who see online, vast majority, you can't say these sort of things to them because whether they agree with you or not, they're scared of getting canceled. You might get canceled, just because you say these things. And definitely, maybe I'm kind of parroting a lot of things a lot of people kind of say on here, but I think it's really important to get, like I said, people's voice who agree with us on a lot of these. Okay, well, not that they agree with us, but people who think more moderately on the issue, I guess I would say. We're not necessarily 100% one extreme or the other. We're more in the center, and I think it's good to get as much of voices like that out there as possible because there's very little in the center. It seems one way or the other, 99%.
Yeah, and yet my suspicion, my hunch
Definitely.
is that those in the middle, the moderates, I think we're actually the majority, but I think we're a silent majority because of fear, because those that are attracted to activism by nature are probably more intense people, and they have a lot, invested into the message that they're trying to push to everyone else. So they tend to silence everyone else. But I think the majority, like yourself, who are just out there living their lives and trying to just get on with it and blend in and be productive citizens, aren't even necessarily aware of how weird the activism is getting. I know a lot of my buddies are completely oblivious to what's kind of happening, and so I'm kind of counting on us being the majority. So by being some of the we weren't the first to speak out, but sort of among some of the people that are speaking out, it's my hope that more people like yourself will step forward and say, yeah, I agree with this more middle ground, moderate message. We just need to wake more people up and inspire some courage in them.
Exactly, and that's what helped me, kind of want to reach out and and just discuss my experience. I feel like I've I've listened to a lot of, I've listened to a lot of episodes on this podcast, and I've listened to some other people who are generally around the same viewpoint. And I've never quite like come across someone's story who I felt like was exactly like mine. I mean, of course, no one's gonna be 100% exactly, but a lot of people I come across, they are maybe not bisexual. They're either one way or the other, like heterosexual or homosexual. That's one difference I noticed, and just um, people who had really successful transitions and who had like a care team like that, like a really thorough information and psychological evaluation before the transition. Like, I don't know, all these sort of components that came together for me. I've never really heard the same kind of combination with other people, so I kind of wanted to get my story out there as well. And, like, I don't, I mean, I work two jobs. I'm a university student. I'm just out there trying to pay my bills. At the end of the day, that's my priority in life. Like, being trans is such a minuscule, like, part of who I am and, like, what I worry about day to day. But when you're trying to relax and watch a YouTube video at the end of the night, and like 300 videos pop up and recommended about like some crazy thing some trans person is, like,
you're like, damn it.
Yeah. Brings attention to it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, it's been
Thanks
great.
very much for telling us your story.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I agree. It's been great to meet you, and I'm glad that you've taken this time to talk to us.
Yeah, it's been great getting to talk to both of you, Aaron's. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Transparency Podcast. If you enjoy our content, please help out our algorithm by hitting like or subscribe. If you'd like to make a donation, follow the link to our PayPal account. On behalf of the Gender Dysphoria Alliance, thanks for your support.